Hello everyone, it's Gina from orchidandopal.com, and today I am back with another tutorial with a piece that is inspired by the contents of the latest BeadingSchool Magic Garden themed box. The Fuchsia box in particular is the level that I had received, and this is one of the other pieces that I had made from the box. It's something that I think would make an awesome pin or a brooch. Once again, this is kind of a more substantial piece, and I also haven't done a piece where I have woven directly onto a metal component, so I thought that would be kind of interesting. As usual, I will leave all of the materials listed and linked right down below the video. Even if you didn't get your hands on the latest BeadingSchool box, you can still pick up all of these items individually from their website, and they also have different colors in some instances. And I'll also leave the information for their bi-monthly subscription box right down below the video too. It's brand new, and the next one will be shipping out sometime in November. Here's a close-up look at this piece. As you can see, it starts out with this metal filigree foundation, and I have embellished it with different sizes of seed beads, some of the rhinestone cup chain that came in the box, as well as some teeny tiny Preciosa Bicones, and even some of those rose Montes that you can see sparkling in the corners. At the bottom, I've added two of the gorgeous Czech leaves with the Picasso finish that they included, and one of these fabric floral dangles at the bottom. Now, I also think you could even leave off the leaves and the dangle if you wanted to and just make the filigree piece itself. That's another option. But even if you don't want to make this specific piece, hopefully it helps you to see how I beaded onto a component like this. Also, if you're curious, here is a look at the back. I'm using some of the smoke color, or actually black color, 6-pound FireLine today to do my beadwork, so that thread kind of blends in with that deep antique bronze color. You are also welcome to cover up the back with some fabric if you wanted to add a pin back. I haven't actually finished this off yet. I wanted you to get a feel for what that looks like, but you can definitely cover that up and make it look really nice before adding a pin. That is totally up to you. So I am not too concerned about my stitches back there. I'm probably going to cover those up somehow. But even without doing that, they kind of blend in with the metal, and that part isn't going to be shown when it's being worn. I'll also be using a size 11 beading needle today. We're going to have some potentially tight spots to go through, so that should help. And to get started, you can go ahead and pull your materials together and thread your beading needle with a comfortable length of beading thread, and we will jump into this tutorial. All right, so here's a close-up look at this filigree component, and it's great because it's got so many different holes, especially right down the center raised section. So it makes it really easy for us to attach our thread and get started. I mean, it's even got these tiny little holes here too. So just lots of places, not even including what's around the outside. But we're going to start with this piece by first attaching our thread somewhere right next to the center portion. And then we're going to sew on a ring of 15 seed beads right around the center. And I like to think of pieces like this as sewing in layers, and it's almost like bead embroidery where you're sewing onto fabric and you're just kind of going around and filling in gaps. But first what I'm going to do is just take my needle and I'm going to go down through one of those holes, and it doesn't really matter which one, and it doesn't matter how pretty this looks at first, because again, that's going to be hidden. But I'm going to just focus on securing my thread to one of these sections first, and I went up the hole that was right next to that. I'm going to go down through the hole where I began, and it's not knotted or anything yet, but it's starting to get tacked down. I'm going to go up through the next hole once again, and then at this point I am just going to tie a half-hitch knot right there. And then I'm just going to go down through this hole again. And there's many ways you could do this. This is just one way. But I actually pulled the knot to the back, and you can actually knot it on the back to begin with if you wanted to. There's more than one way to do that. I'm going to make one more knot. There we go. So yeah, start on the front or the back, but just kind of get that knot back there and get your thread secured so you can start beading. That is the main point. So I'm going to go up through the hole right next to where my knot is. And I'm coming out right there. And what we're going to do is just start adding on a ring of 15-0 seed beads in that mustardy yellow color. And I'm going to start sewing these on, say like 3 at a time. And we're going to definitely use all these holes around the center to our advantage. First, pick up 3 15-0s and then go down through the next hole after the one that you're coming out of. And you may need to just hold those beads in place for now so they don't go down the hole there. And then go back up the original hole where you started to get behind those beads, holding them in place right now with my nail. It'll get easier as we go. And then I'm going to go back through those same 3 seed beads, just like that, and pull. And I'm going to just make sure I pull this nice and tight and that those are sitting on top of that little metal ridge. And then I'm going to pick up 3 more 15-0s and go through the next hole. Just like that. And this is where it's kind of like bead embroidery because it's kind of the same way of approaching that type of a stitch. One of my beads went down through the hole, but that's okay. Again, I'm just going to hold that with my finger. And I'm going to take my needle and go up through that hole right before so that I can get behind those 3 seed beads we just added and go back through them. Just like that. Holding that in place with my finger and pulling. And you can see that this is starting to bring the beads together, and we're gonna just kind of go in 3s in that manner. So coming out of that seed bead right there, which is over this hole, I'm gonna pick up 3 more. And then I'm gonna go down through the next hole. Then I'm gonna poke my needle up so that it's coming up behind those 3 seed beads we just added. And then I'm going to sew through those 3 seed beads again. So you can see we're starting to get that ring of beads in place. And the thing about a piece like this too is it doesn't have to be exact. So it's kind of like embroidery where it's a little bit more loose and organic, and you just have to see what looks good and how many beads actually fill in the space. So I'm going to follow my original piece as a guide, but also think about that sort of thing if you're taking these techniques and using them towards something else you might be beading around. So let's continue working in 3s all the way around and see where we end up. We may need to add another bead or 2 just to fill in any final gaps, because the ultimate goal is for this to be an even ring of beads. And once they're all in there, we're going to sew through that ring again. So you see right now it's got some little ups and downs where we've done the groups of 3, but we're going to be going around all the beads again, which will help straighten them out in the end. So keep going and we will meet back in a little bit. All right, and welcome back. So I'm at my last section here, and I'm coming out of these 3 seed beads. I think I'm going to do 3 more and go down that open hole right there. Again, come up behind those 3 go through those and just kind of scrunching these beads together a little bit. I can see that I could probably add 2 more 15-0s between where I stopped here and then the beginning, just to fill in a little bit more of that space. So I'm going to pick up 2 and head through the first 3 seed beads we added and continue on through even more, as many as I can get through at one time. And get my tail thread out of the way and pull. So you can see we've got beads all the way around now, and we're just going to continue sewing through all those beads to get this to straighten out a little bit. So just go through as many as you can at a time. And pull them together, and that just helps these to lay out a little bit smoother. And I like to just take my fingers and just kind of move the beads around a little bit so that they're spaced out evenly. And you want to just continue going a little bit past where you started. And pull that all together. And again, just take your fingers and kind of smooth these around and try to make them all kind of equal distance from each other. And you can see that I could have even added a couple more because there are some little tiny gaps overall, but it looks good. That's the general idea. So we've got our first ring of seed beads on, and then our next layer to this piece is actually a layer of cup chain that we're going to sew on. All right, so I have this section of cup chain here, and cup chain is one of those things that can be a challenge to work with if you're not used to it, but it can also be a lot of fun. One thing to note about it is that the rhinestones do shift, so they do have the tendency to either get closer together or they can be pulled further apart. And actually you can use that to your advantage if you want to in some cases. And for this, I found that about 15 rhinestones worth covers the area that is perfect to sit right next to those seed beads. But I'm going to just start out with the entire length here that I have. So you can use the whole strand if you want to as you get started. It gives you more to hang on to, I find, and it also gives you the option to set the stones closer together if you want, or set them further apart. And that way you're not stuck with using a certain amount that you clipped off and then you look back and say, oh, I wish I had another rhinestone or something like that. So we're going to start with this length, which is probably about 10 inches. And I have my thread coming out of one of these seed beads first, but I actually don't want it to be coming out of a seed bead. So I'm going to go down through the hole next to that seed bead. And I'm going to come up and say this section right here. And I want to stress that there's more than one way to do this. With a filigree component and with things like embroidery, which this is similar to, this is going to be something that has more than one way to achieve a similar effect. So don't stress about going through the exact same holes that I do when I'm stringing these things on, because remember that back is going to be covered up. So as long as you are close, that's really all that matters. But right now I have my cup chain to where this first bar is sitting right here next to where my thread's coming out at that opening. And we're going to be tacking down the cup chain as close to those seed beads as we can. So just holding that in place with my fingers, I'm going to then go down a hole right there next to the other side of that bar. And then when we pull gently, you want to catch that spot that's right in between those first 2 rhinestones. And you may have to hold your finger there to get it to catch and just gently pull so that that first rhinestone is in place. Once the first rhinestone is in place, I like to go back and kind of do that again. So I'm coming up next to the rhinestone again, and I'm going to go back down so that my thread is looped in there a couple of times, and then pull. And now what we're going to do is move on to the next space between the next 2 rhinestones. And keep in mind, do you want your rhinestones to sit really close or do you want them spaced apart? That's up to you. So I want a tiny bit of a gap, maybe just for flexibility. I don't need them butting up right next to each other. Something like that will be fine. And I'm going to come up where I can, say like right here, which could be next to the next section that we want to tack down. Bring your needle up and then go down through a hole that is on the other side of that space. And then when you pull your thread, once again, make sure it loops and hooks right in that gap. And I would just go ahead and do that again, just because every little bit of reinforcement can help. And now that one's tacked down twice also. So we're just going to continue with that type of technique all the way around. Main thing is just trying to keep those rhinestones evenly spaced and just get your thread to come up as close as you can to the rhinestone. So for the next one, I could come up right here and then go down through that hole on the other side and just make sure your thread is catching that bar and not getting caught up in the prongs of the rhinestone. And I'll do that section again. So you can see now I've got 3 sections tacked down and the rest of it's loose, and then I just shift and turn and complete another one. So my next one will be right here, and I'm just going to find any space that I can that's as close to it as possible. Even if it's a little bit further to the front or to the back, because I've got this big piece of metal right here. So I think I'm just going to come up right at this spot. And then go over that bar area and go down. And this is what I'm going to have to help guide in the right place as it gets smaller. There we go. The other thing you want to make sure is that your cup chain is not turning off to the side, so just keep that face up while you go, and that double reinforcement should help with that too. And go up this one again. And then down. Here we go. So I hope you get the idea. Keep going until you get towards the end, right over here, back to where you started, and then we'll meet back and we'll finish off this section. All right, so I'm at my last section, and I'm going to flip this over, and just out of a extra step of reinforcement, I'm going to go under that last thread bridge that we created from our last rhinestone section that we had tacked down, and that's just going to hold everything in place even tighter. Like everything feels really solid and secure except for this very last point. And now I'm just going to clip 1 or 2 rhinestones away from where we're ending to get rid of that excess. And we kind of have a choice here. We could have 2 more there, or 1 more. 1 more, we could space out like that. That's what I think I'm going to do. So now what I think I'm going to do is go up through, we'll say this section right here, so that I can tack down that area. In the next section, just like that. I'm going to go through this section, tack it down once more, just like we've been doing. And then this last rhinestone that's hanging off, I am going to take some wire cutters and just trim that off. And you can see how our rhinestones have pretty much fallen into place. I'm just gonna reinforce the first and the last. So I'm gonna go right in front of where the first rhinestone is and just kind of bring those together. So I'm gonna go around with my thread, loop around the last rhinestone. This may look a little confusing and it's totally optional, but it's just kind of a way that I'm bringing the ends of the rhinestone cup chain together so that this looks like a complete circle and you can't tell where we stopped or started. Then I'm going to go back down, tacking down that section where we had started again. So basically I made a loop around those two ends to hold them together. And I'm just going to go up behind that last one and reinforce that one more time. And bring the thread down in between those two rhinestones. And it's looking really good. I'm just going to hold this tight, turn it over, and I'm going to go underneath one of the thread bridges under here, underneath the piece, and make a half hitch knot. And that looks really good. So of course we've got more layering to do. That's going to hold everything in place together too. But also with the back being tacked down, and you can do a couple of half hitch knots back there after you do your cup chain. That's going to really keep everything nice and tight that you just did. So the cup chain portion is probably one of the most tedious portions. If you can get through that and take your time, then you will have no problem with the rest of this piece. And in our next layer, we're going to bring in our 3mm fire polish, and we're going to do another ring of beads right around the cup chain. So go ahead and get those, and we're going to bead those on. All right, so I have my fire polish, and I also went ahead and wove in my tail thread to where it's hidden and knotted it off a couple more times and clipped it because I didn't want it in the way for the next steps. And right now I'm coming out of this hole right here. Just come out somewhere right next to your cup chain, which is where we're going to get started with our fire polish. And you can just string on 3 at a time and do something very similar to what you did with the 15-0s. And then just kind of see, for example, if you string these down and hold those against the cup chain without any gaps, where would your needle then need to go? And you can either go somewhere like that or that. I'll probably just go down this hole and pull those next to the cup chain. Then I'm going to come back up right behind those 3 fire polish and go through them again. Pull tight, turn, and pick up 3 more fire polish. Again, you can pull those down right up against the last ones and see where your needle would need to go. I can go right down here, then come up behind the last 3 and go through them again, and just do this all the way around. All right, so I'm getting to my last section here. I'm gonna go down there, and I may need to add one more, coming up behind those 3. Let's see, if I pull these all together. No, actually, I think this could be just fine like it is. So I'm just going to continue on. And just like we did with the 15-0s, just go through that entire ring of beads again. and pull, and just shift them with your fingers a little bit if you need to get them to sit in a uniform way. That'll hold all these together. And you're just going to go a little bit past where you started. All right, now I'm going to put my needle down through one of the holes so I can get to the back. And I am going to make a couple of knots back here, going under the thread bridge to make a loop and going through that. And my thread is getting short enough that I'm going to need to add on a new one. So that's what I'm going to do. My needle just came out of this one before I could make a couple more knots. But I am going to complete knotting this piece of thread off. Then I'm going to add on a new one. We'll add on the new one just like we did in the first place, and I'll be going around a section and making a couple knots and then putting my needle up next to the fire polish section to continue on. So let me go ahead and take care of that, and we'll meet back and complete the next step. All right, so I've added another thread onto my piece and knotted it onto the back the same way that I did before, and now I'm ready to go for the next step. I brought in those greenish 11-0 seed beads because that's what we're going to work on next. And this is where it kind of starts to matter where you want the top of your piece and where you want the bottom. So I've decided I want this to be at the top. So locate one of those 4 petal looking shapes and determine which one you have with a fire polish that's directly below it. Depending on where your fire polish are sitting, you may have one of these sections that doesn't have a fire polish that's really directly centered. This one is right here, this one is, this one's not really. Anyway, I'm going to pick this side and make that the top, and I'm coming out of the left-hand side of the fire polish that's directly underneath. And we're going to start making a little zigzag shape with our seed beads. We're going to pick up 5 of these 11-0s, and then we are going to go down through the next fire polish and be patient on this step. My needle is wanting to go through the back of the piece. That's okay. I'll just feed it back toward the front. And you can see the tip of my needle is kind of bent, and that's because going through these fire polish, it's going to take a little bit of patience just because they're on there good, and the way they're positioned, it may actually be an advantage to have a bent tip on your needle because it does not want to curve through there. Anyway, so now you can see we have 5 of those 11-0s, and it's centered right there facing up towards that top petal, I'll call it, of this flower, which is going to be center and the top of our piece. We're going to continue on by picking up 5 more 11-0s and doing this almost all the way around. We are going to skip over this pink bead, this fire polish. I'm coming out of this side, and I'm going to go through the next one. And keep doing that, picking up 5. Skipping this one and going through the next one. All right, so I'm stopping right here on this side. I made a total of 6 of these little loops of green beads, and I want to leave the bottom section without those green beads because we're going to add our leaves and other things down there and we just don't need them. So now what you can do, instead of going back through all the pink beads, if you don't want to, you can just take your needle and weave back and forth through the filigree component, which will be hidden on the back. I'm just going up and down, and what I'm trying to do is make my way back over to the fire polish to the left, where we're going to be adding the groups of green beads on the other side. So I'm gonna go just down through here. It's just a lot easier than trying to go through the fire polish, and it's hiding the thread anyway, so it'll all work out. And I'm gonna come out right about there. That way I can make 5 more of these green zigzags on the other side. So I'm gonna come out of that fire polish and just poke my needle back up through there so that I can pick up my next 5 seed beads. Skip over the next fire polish and go through the next one. And then pick up 5 more and do the same thing. And I have 1 more to go to make it even. All right, so that's what you should have so far. And once again, that's going to be the top of our piece. So that's going to be the bottom where the leaves will eventually go.